In ancient times, there was a boy named Zidwan, who became an orphan at a very young age after his parents passed away one after the other. Poor Zidwan was left with no support, and even getting a full meal became a struggle. Fortunately, his parents had been kind to their neighbors, especially to old lady Dao, who was deeply sympathetic towards Zidwan and decided to take him into her own home to care for him. Old lady Dao treated Zidwan as her own child and took care of him until he was 16 years old. As old lady Dao's own son grew up and was about to get married, Zidwan felt that he had grown up enough and shouldn't trouble old lady Dao's family any longer. So he decided to move back into his ancestral home. At 16, Zidwan had grown into a strong young man, working hard every day in his own fields, hoping to make a good life for himself with his hard work. One day, while working in the field, Zidwan found a large snail in the dish. He picked it up and noticed that this snail was different from the usual ones he saw. It was larger and had distinct, bright patterns on its shell. Zidwan liked it very much, so he brought the large snail home and kept it in a big jar. Ever since he started keeping this beautiful snail, Zidwan felt a sense of attachment. He would change the water in the jar every day and often talked to the snail when he came home from the fields, treating it as a member of his family, which made his home feel less lonely. Every morning, before going out to work in the fields, Zidwan would speak to the snail, saying, "Snail, I'm going out to work now. Wait for me to come back home." In the evening, though tired, he would still go to the jar to check on the snail, saying, "Snail, I'm back. How are you?" And at night, before going to sleep, he would look at the snail for a while and say, "Snail, it's getting late. I need to rest now. I'll talk to you again tomorrow." Time flew, and the snail had been with Zidwan for 3 months. On this particular day, just like usual, Zidwan finished his work in the field and came home, only to be greeted by the smell of delicious food. As soon as he opened the door, he found his simple dining table laden with hot food: steamed fish, green vegetables, a pot of steaming chicken soup, and a bowl of fragrant rice. As if someone had prepared a meal, just waiting for him to return. Wondering who had made these dishes, he noticed that the firewood under the stove was not completely extinguished, indicating that the food was indeed prepared at his home. After a quick check outside, he found no one around. After some thought, Zidwan assumed it must have been old lady Dao who had come over to cook for him. He sat down at the dining table, tasted the fish, and found it deliciously exceptional, even better than what old lady Dao usually made. However, being very hungry, he didn't dwell on it much and started eating heartily. That night, Zidwan had a beautiful dream in which he came home every day to find someone had prepared such delicious meals for him. The dream was so pleasant that he couldn't help but laugh out loud. The next evening, just like before, Zidwan came home from the fields to find the table again set with fragrant meals, the stove still warm, as if the cook knew exactly when he would return. For the next 8 or 9 days, every day Zidwan came home to hot meals, filling him with gratitude and warmth. Old lady Dao has been so good to me, raising me like her own child, and now coming over every day to prepare meals for me. I must personally thank her. After eating, Zidwan quickly tidied up and hurried to old lady Dao's house. Just as he was about to express his gratitude, old lady Dao said, "Zidwan, you've lived in my house for so many years, and I've always treated you as my own child, even though you've moved out to live on your own. How could you not tell me about such a big event as getting married?" "What? Getting married?" Zidwan was stunned and hurriedly replied, "Old lady Dao, I haven't gotten married." "Who told you that? Would I not tell you if I got married?" However, old lady Dao insisted, "Zidwan, don't hide it from me. I've seen it myself. It's been several days. There's a young woman in your yard cooking and cleaning. I don't recognize her. If she's not your wife, who else could she be? Sid Wan was extremely puzzled by old lady Dang's words. How could there be a woman cooking in his home? He decided not to explain further at the moment, and resolved to get to the bottom of the matter when he got home the next day. As usual, before leaving for work, he went to the snail and said, "Snail, I'm off to work in the fields. Wait here for me to come back." Then he set off to work, returning home a bit earlier than usual in the evening. This time, instead of entering the house directly, Sid Wan quietly hid in a corner, ready to see who was preparing meals for him. After a while, he heard a splashing sound from the jar, followed by the sight of a girl standing up from inside it. She wore a simple green dress. Her hair was neatly tied up with a wooden hairpin, and she had a pretty face. She efficiently tidied up the room, and then went to the jar to take a fish out, cleaned it, picked some fresh grains from the garden, took out a bowl of rice from her pocket, and began to cook. Sid Wan finally discovered who had been making meals for him every day. It was the snail. He was both surprised and delighted, wanting the snail girl to stay and live with him. He quietly took the snail shell from the jar while she was cooking and hid it. After preparing the meal, the snail girl went to the jar to return to her shell, only to find it missing. Panicking, she exclaimed, "Without my snail shell, how can I go back?" At that moment, Sid Wan came forward and said, "I hid the snail shell. Thank you for cooking and cleaning for me these past days. I wanted to talk to you." "So I hid the shell." The snail girl blushed upon seeing Sid Wan, pleading softly, "Please return the snail shell to me. I need to go back." Sid Wan, fond of the kind snail girl, earnestly asked her to stay. The snail girl, already fond of the hard-working and sincere Sid Wan, agreed to stay with him. The two were wedded in the presence of their fellow villagers and began their life together. However, a malevolent creature sought to disrupt their happiness. A lich spirit, who had long coveted the beauty of the snail girl and wanted her for himself, was enraged to learn that she had married a human, especially a poor one like Sid Wan. Determined to take the snail girl back, the lich spirit stole the snail shell. One day, when Sid Wan was out working, and the snail girl had gone to a neighbor's house, thinking he now had control over the snail girl, the lich spirit gleefully returned to the ditch by the field. As night fell and the village was filled with the smoke of cooking fires, the lich spirit guessed that the snail girl would be preparing dinner. He took out the stolen snail shell and began chanting a spell. "Duo, duo, duo. Snail girl, quickly return to your shell. Snail girl, quickly return to your shell. Duo, duo." Joy double quotes the snail girl, who was cooking at home, suddenly found herself unable to move, and involuntarily returned to the snail shell, crying out, "Sid Wan, come save me." Perhaps it was fate. But Sid Wan, who was working in the fields, heard the snail girl's cries for help. He immediately called his neighbors together and rushed to the ditch, scattering salt where the lich spirit lurked. Terrified of the salt, the lich spirit writhed in agony and soon perished. The snail girl was saved, emerging from the snail shell to continue her happy life with Sid Wan. Despite their happiness, there were times of disagreement. Whenever the snail girl was upset, she would ignore Sid Wan, stomp her feet, and retreat into the snail shell. Sid Wan would patiently play by the jar until the snail girl's anger subsided, and she was willing to see him again. Thus, they lived together for several years, and the snail girl even bore them a son. As the child grew, he played with the village children until one day, a mischievous child taunted him. "Duo, duo, duo, quickly return to the snail shell. Your mother is a transformed snail. We don't want to play with you anymore." Upset by his peers' warning, The child didn't want his mother to return to the snail shell, so he took it out and buried it under an osmanthus tree. Without the snail shell, the snail girl could no longer revert to her previous form, and lived as a human until she grew old, fell ill, and passed away. Many years later, a disaster struck the land where the snail girl had lived, leading to a famine. The villagers' food supplies dwindled, forcing them to eat grass roots, leaves, and even bark. While digging for tree roots under the osmanthus tree, the snail girl's descendants unearthed the large snail shell and used it to hold the rest of their rice grains. Miraculously, the rice in the shell never ran out. Thanks to this magical snail shell, the family survived the famine. Gradually, the story of the snail shell spread and was passed down through generations, with people saying it was the very shell in which the snail girl had once lived. Thank you for watching this heartwarming story. If it touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more stories filled with love and hope. Your support is our greatest motivation, and we look forward to bringing you more beautiful stories. Thank you again for your watch and support.